Welcome to this session organized by the Tata-Cornell Institute. It's on the true cost of food and specifically the true cost of the public distribution system. Some of you who heard me in my keynote address 2 days ago, I provided some particular to this, to what's coming out of this session today. We talk about transforming food systems, but one of the big drivers of what's produced in this country is basically the safety net programs and the procurement for the safety net programs. And so it turns out that over 40% of all the rice and wheat that's produced in this country goes into the procurement system. That's a fact that actually I had not realized until we started to look at the PDS. So all the MSPs, all the input supports, subsidies, electricity, water subsidies, all of this is targeting the way in which you increase the pile of rice and wheat and draw it into the procurement system. And it turns out that 80% of the rice and wheat that's procured for the public distribution system comes from just 6 states. And Punjab and Haryana are the main providers, but then some in MP and down south in Andhra and Tamil Nadu, etc. And the consumption side of this story is very much a story of Eastern India. So a large part of the PDS consumption goes to Eastern India. So you have this value chain that's been created over the decades of massive production of rice and wheat that goes into the procurement system and is delivered to Eastern India. So when you have that situation, the costs are tremendous. The actual costs of production are essentially a small part of the total cost. The cost of transporting is a big part, but the environmental costs of this PDS system are enormous, as we'll show you data on. So the cost in terms of degradation of water resources, soil resources, all of the issues around pollution, etc., are big costs of the system. And as we think about climate change, and as we think about mitigating the effects of climate change through smarter agriculture, then the PDS and how we manage the PDS is a really important part, and that needs to be addressed. So, over the last year, the Tata-Cornell Institute has actually done a detailed documentation on the true costs of the PDS. And I presented a slide, and Raghav will speak more about this, but in Indian rupee terms, the total cost of the PDS works out to be 3 lakh crores. I think that's right. 3 lakh crores per year, out of which the actual monetary cost is only around 1.2 lakh crores. So it's twice as much when you bring in all the hidden costs of the PDS. So then the question is, what do we do about it? What are the options that are available? And there are different options that one can look at. The most commonly talked about options are, let's bring in some other crops into the PDS, crops that are more climate friendly, such as millets. So we have results that show what happens when you bring in millets into the PDS. Not complete change from rice and wheat to millets, but a partial substitution of millets into the PDS. But there are other options, looking at local procurement system. is another way to think about it. But also, you don't want to throw out the baby with what's that saying? Baby with bathwater. Because you don't want to say we're not going to do rice and wheat anymore. So what are more efficient ways of doing rice and wheat production? How do you reduce some of the costs, the hidden costs of the rice wheat production system, etc.? So these are all different options that we should be thinking about. So my role today is to introduce the topic and to introduce Raghav Puri, who's going to make a detailed presentation on the work that we've done in this area. And then we'll have a Q&A. And after that, we've got a really exciting panel of researchers and practitioners who've been looking at various models for more sustainable production systems, more regenerative production systems. And then we'll introduce you to the panel once we finish the Q&A. Raghav has been working with us now for the last 2 years, and Raghav did his PhD at Syracuse University in public administration, public policy. But he also spent many years before doing his PhD in Chhattisgarh, working on the PDS systems and looking at how the PDS systems function, etc. And we're fortunate that we have someone in our team who knows the entire procurement, public distribution system, the safety net programs, in and out in India. And I give the floor to Raghav.
Could we have the presentation? Hi, so I'm Raghav Puri. I'm a researcher at the Tata-Cornell Institute, and today I'll be talking about reducing the true cost of India's public distribution system. Why are we here and why are we talking about the true cost of food? Well, the prices that we pay for food partially account for the costs associated with production and consumption to improve food systems. What you see on your right is the cover page of the most recent State of Food and Agriculture, also called SOFA. So SOFA 2024 by the FAO this year focus exclusively on true cost accounting. I think what's a departure, two SOFAs, so next year, SOFA 2024, will also focus on true cost and its practical applications. This is to say that, over the past 4 years, true cost accounting, or trying to estimate the hidden costs, has been there for a while. In economics, there's cost-benefit analysis. But in this case, I think over the past 5 years, there's been this sort of build-up or movement to use TCA, and so it's kind of becoming a buzzword, and a lot of people are starting to use and show interest in this methodology. And so we focus on the true cost of food-based safety nets, and in India, that's mostly the PDS because it's such a large component of it, and so that's what we do for our project. So very briefly, to give you a sense of the PDS, the PDS provides highly subsidized food grain to over 800 million people. That's about 60% of India's current population. And beneficiaries receive subsidized food grain every month. Most beneficiaries receive 5 kgs, a combination of rice and wheat, and in very few cases millet. And these are distributed through a network of about 500,000 PDS shops across the country. When we talk about prices, rice, wheat, and millet are sold or provided to beneficiaries at 3, 2, and 1 rupees per kg, respectively. The market prices for these are 37, 31, and 36.5. So the government takes on a large burden of the cost, and so these are available at very low prices. The government recently announced that for the next 5 years, grain is going to be provided free. So the 321 that's in the National Food Security Act is not going to be relevant for the next 5 years. So talking about why is the PDS important and why is it important to look at its true cost? I think the major role here is, and what the slide shows is, that procurement and distribution of food play a key role in determining what's produced and consumed in any country, but particularly in India. What you see on this graph are, the top 2 lines are the production lines for wheat and for rice and wheat. Rice is orange, wheat is green, and then the dotted lines are the corresponding procurement lines. And what you see here is that of all the production of rice and wheat in India, 44% of rice and 41% of wheat is procured by the government. So this is a large amount. It obviously plays a huge role in the rice and wheat market. But what you also see, and this is important for the latter part of the presentation, is numbers for millet. And so those are the blue lines. If you see, it's kind of stagnant over the past 10 years. India produces 16 million tons of millet. When I say 16 million tons, we're looking at just the 3 major millets. So jowar, bajra, ragi. And of this, 0.6 million tons is procured by the government. That is 4% of total millet procurement. The reason I wanted to put this up front was because a lot of times we talk about millets as a silver bullet. You'll hear a lot of talk about just introduce them in the PDS. Why is the government not doing that? I think it's important to highlight that the production is really low. Current procurement is really low, and I'll talk more about it later. However, there's still potential to include millets in the PDS. It just requires a lot of work. So what I showed you first in that graph was the total India level numbers. Now let's focus on what's happening at the state level. So what you see behind me is, I hope everybody can see it. What you see behind me is the percentage share of total production of rice and wheat in India for 2021-22. And as you would expect, the Gangetic Plains, UP is one of the highest providers just by its sheer size. What you also see is Madhya Pradesh, which is a large producer, but again Punjab, which is providing about 10 to 15% of the produce of rice and wheat in India. Now let's look at a map for procurement. So this is total production. What is the share of procurement of each state? And this is really, this is a very interesting map. So now what you see here is more than 15% of, for both for Madhya Pradesh and for Punjab, each of them are responsible for more than 15% of the procurement into the rice and wheat procurement system. But what's interesting is this map changed 2 years ago. So we had this map in our first policy brief, and only Punjab and Haryana were responsible for more than 15%. Over the past 5 years, MP has suddenly become a prominent wheat provider. There's been a massive increase in wheat procurement from MP, and so the map has changed. The other interesting states here are Chhattisgarh. So Chhattisgarh initially did not have a lot of procurement, but over the past decade or so, Chhattisgarh has become one of the big providers into the procurement system for rice, and Telangana as well. And the last map you see is the share, state-wise shares of beneficiaries. And what you see here is, just by sheer size and the incidence of poverty, UP and Bihar have the highest shares. But what I would like you to focus on is Rajasthan, Maharashtra, 2 places which have really large shares of PDS beneficiaries. But then when you look at the same states in these areas, there's very low production of rice and wheat. There's very low procurement of rice and wheat. The other state that's interesting to look here is Bihar. Now Bihar is a very populated state, has a large number of PDS beneficiaries. Bihar does have some 5 to 10% of production, but again, procurement is a lot low in Bihar. So this is just to give you a sense of, there is a possibility of procuring from states that are currently not providing into the procurement system, but that's something that needs to be discussed on what are the problems, why is this not happening. So why are we looking at the hidden costs? Why are we interested in the hidden cost of food-based safety nets in particular? I think I made a case for the fact that they play a huge role in the Indian agriculture system, particularly for rice and wheat, the staple grains. But also, if you look at how we've reached here today, that there are certain states that are providing most of PDS food grain, we see that government policies have incentivized rice and wheat production. There's a historical part to it. So the historical part is that when Green Revolution started, some states adopted it, were better at adopting it than the others, and Punjab and Haryana had that advantage. But over time, more recently, guaranteed prices, fertilizer and power subsidies make production of rice and wheat more profitable for the farmers, and so it's more lucrative, and so a lot of farmers choose to grow these crops. The negative impacts, so it's not wrong to grow rice and wheat. Rice and wheat is very important for food security. I think it's always important in these conversations, particularly these slides, to go back and remember how important they were in ensuring food security. It's easy just to stand here today and criticize it, but it's also important to look at the negative impacts. I think the area that's kind of witnessed most of these negative impacts, or where we see it very visibly, is northwestern India. And 3 examples of this are the overuse of groundwater. This is something that's very well documented. Excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides, and air pollution from crop residue burning that's the most visible to all of us, particularly in Delhi. So now that I've sort of talked about what are the hidden costs, what do we do about this, and what are the ways to bring in these hidden costs into our decision-making process, how we think about what we're growing. And one of the ways to do this is true cost accounting, or TCA. So TCA is an approach to estimate the hidden costs of food from farm to plate. There are various frameworks or studies that have come up. The original one was Deep Agri Framework, which is the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. This is by United Nations Environment Program. There's the Rockefeller Framework. This is a study on the true cost of food in the US, the US food system. Most recently, the FAO report has proposed a way to go about how to do a true cost accounting. So again, at a very nascent stage, different methodologies. There's a lot of talk within the TCA community about harmonization, and so that's going on right now. For our study, so I should have mentioned this earlier, our study is funded by Rockefeller Foundation, but that has nothing to do with the fact that we choose the Rockefeller Foundation framework for our study. We looked at all the various frameworks, and I think the Rockefeller framework is very interesting. A, it's very easy to use. B, I would highly recommend, if anybody's interested in using TCA in the future, they've made their whole model public. So you can go and download the Excel file. It shows you all their assumptions, all their numbers. If you don't agree with a certain number, you can change the number. So I think that type of transparency is very helpful. And so we're going to do that as well. In March, April, when we release our final report, we're going to release the model. So it's accessible to everybody, and everybody knows how the numbers were calculated. So what you do within the Rockefeller framework, but also in general, broadly, TCA frameworks, you identify, quantify, and monetize metrics. Metrics are food-related impacts, so it could be greenhouse gas emissions, it could be health costs associated with unhealthy diets. For 4 focus areas: environment, health, economy, livelihoods. In the Deep Agri framework, they divide environment into environment and biodiversity. So you'll see some differences, but broadly this is the approach for TCA. So our analysis is based on existing literature and administrative data. The metrics are expansive, not exhaustive. It's very difficult to sort of quantify every metric, or even list every metric. So one of the aims, one of the approaches we've adopted is to look at the big metrics. So the big costs associated. But in the case of India, with limited data, you're also limited by the fact that some metrics don't, you cannot quantify them or monetize them. In those cases, there's always an opportunity to qualitatively assess those metrics. Finally, our quantification is conservative. This is to make sure that if there are 3 numbers available, you go with the smallest number, and that's just trying to be conservative to not overstate the cost, the true costs. So for our analysis, what I'm presenting today, we look at the financial cost. The financial cost is just the the cost that we see in the budget. If we were to open the food department's budget, the food subsidy would be equal to the price, the central government's role in the PDS. So you have the price paid by consumers, the costs incurred by governments. There's also some role for state governments. And however, for today's presentation, I focus on where you see these policy briefs on your tables. And so I specifically focus on what we've looked at in the policy brief, but our final analysis goes beyond these metrics. So within environment, which is the focus area, we look at greenhouse gas emissions and we look at unsustainable water use. Unsustainable water use was the different ways to measure it. In our case, we look at the irrigated water, so we're not looking at rainwater. And within irrigated water, which is also called blue water, we make an assumption that 25% of this water is unsustainably being used. This is a very conservative estimate because a lot of studies show it's 50 to 60%, so that varies. So as I said, it was identify, quantify, and monetize. So before I go to the numbers, I wanted to give you an illustration of how we've come about these numbers. So in terms of identification, in this case, let's look at the example of greenhouse gas emissions from PDS rice. How do we go about thinking about estimating the cost of these? So the first part is to quantify. So to quantify, we use a paper by Dr. Nayak, who's here, who will be presenting later in the session. He and his colleagues estimated that 2,440 kgs of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions on average in India for per hectare of rice. But what the catch here is, whenever you're looking at costs, I think it's very important to look at it per kilogram instead of per hectare. A lot of times you see numbers which say that millets are very low in greenhouse gas emissions, or millets are very low in water use, but it's often measured per hectare. So it doesn't account for the fact that per hectare you're getting a lot more rice and wheat compared to millet. And so we convert that to per kg. So we divide the greenhouse gas emissions from per hectare by the output or the rice that you get from per hectare and get a per kilogram estimate of 0.87. And then we multiply this by the total rice distributed through the PDS, which is about 25.2 million tons. And so when you multiply it, you get a number, 21.92 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions from PDS rice. The difficult part now is monetization, and this is the part that I think a lot of TCA studies are now trying to harmonize and trying to think of ways that we can do this better. There are lots of numbers. What's the cost of a kilogram of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions? There are multiple ways to do this. Some people use, if there's a carbon trading market, you can use the cost of carbon. Other ways are to look at social cost of carbon. There are calculations that do social cost of carbon. What we've done is we've partnered with the Impact Institute. This is an institute based in Netherlands. Netherlands is big on true cost. Often when you go to grocery stores, you'll have the, if you're buying an apple, it'll say what's the cost of apple, and then there's the true cost of apple written right next to it. So we partnered with them, and we're very grateful that they shared their data with us. So they have country level models by year for various costs related to water, costs related to greenhouse gas emissions. And so their number for their model for India for 2023 is $0.18 per kilogram. And so we use this number and we come up with the total cost of greenhouse gas emissions from PDS rice as $3.95 billion. So just to give you a sense of, because I'm going to throw numbers at you in the next slide, so just have a sense of how we came about these numbers. So if we look at the true cost of the PDS, again, based on what we have in the policy brief, because we only looked at greenhouse gas emissions and unsustainable water use. We're also currently looking at more metrics that I'll talk about at the end of the slide. So what consumers pay is $1.4 billion. The rest of it, the cost of acquiring grain, paying farmers MSP, processing it and distributing it through the PDS is about 16.6 billion. So that comes to 18.1 billion. But then when we add costs associated with the unsustainable water use and GHG emissions, this comes to about, the total comes to about 35 billion. So it's approximately double the cost. And it's important to remember we're only looking at two metrics. So when you add more metrics, this number is good. This is very conservative. It's going to increase a lot more. Most studies that we've seen, for example, the true cost study in the US, found that the true cost was 3 times the actual cost that we pay, when we buy food. So I think what's important, we've looked at the national story, but I think what's important, as we discussed in those maps about the spatial distribution of procurement, what we're looking at here is the state-wise per capita true cost of the PDS. This is the financial cost, so this is just the cost borne by consumers and governments. But when we add the cost of water and then we add the cost of GHG emissions, we see that certain states, are responsible, as we'd expect, the ones that produce and provide most of the PDS grain, they're responsible for most of the costs. Now, here we're looking at the origin of the cost, because greenhouse gas emissions, it's irrelevant where they're coming from, they're affecting everybody. But when you look at water use, Punjab and Haryana are basically transferring their water to other states. And this is something that is not accounted for, because of course farmers in Punjab and Haryana are benefiting from the MSP, but it's also leading to some environmental costs that are not accounted for in the price. So now that we've told you about the true cost, explained what the distribution of these costs are in terms of environmental costs, what do we do about it? So there are three methods that we're looking at, areas where how do we reduce the true cost of the PDS. The first is promoting millets in the PDS, and this is what I'm going to talk about today, because this refers to the policy brief that you see on your table, and so we'll go into more detail about it. The second is decentralizing procurement. As I mentioned, some states are producing but not contributing to the procurement system, and a lot of this has to do with the historical nature of how the FCI was formed and how the procurement system was formed, because in Punjab and Haryana, the economies of scale. It's easy to open procurement centers, they're already there, the infrastructure exists. But in states like Bihar or in states like UP, there's a potential to open procurement centers. They might not have the same economies of scale as Punjab and Haryana, but they do help in reducing the transportation cost. And they also end up providing the MSP benefit to those farmers. I think this is a very important point. When the government announces MSPs, you can only get the MSP if there's a procurement center where you can sell the rice to or the wheat to. So in certain states where this is not available, often the poorer states, they don't get the benefit of the MSP because they don't have a place to sell it to. Finally, making rice and wheat, the existing rice and wheat, more sustainable, and this is something Dr. Nayak and Dr. Haripriya are going to talk about today after the presentation. And so again, reduce water use, reduce overuse of inputs, and reduce crop residue burning. So for a final report that comes out in April, we are also going to show estimates of savings and true costs of decentralized procurement and rice and wheat, sustainable rice and wheat growing. So again, I don't need to make a case. I think we've seen a lot of information about millets this past year. they're good. There's lots of health advantages. The two big ones are high iron and low glycemic index for millets compared to rice and wheat. Also, the environmental impacts. Now, these are numbers that I've used for estimating the true cost of the PDS. So if you see the bars, it's the unsustainable water use, and when you compare rice and wheat to millet, there's a huge gap, and this is per kilogram, so it accounts for yields. If you look at greenhouse gas emissions, millet and wheat are kind of closer, but rice, of course, has very high greenhouse gas emissions because of flooding of fields. So I've shown you the map for wheat and rice, but now let's look at the same map for millets. I think what's very important to remember is that for wheat and rice, we were talking about, I think, 230 million tons. Here we're talking about 16 million tons, so that's what you're seeing on the millet map. In terms of production, a lot of the production is Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Karnataka, the same places that did not have rice and wheat. If you look at procurement, majority of the procurement comes from Karnataka, and again, if you look at where it's being distributed right now, it's mainly a Karnataka story, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But just to give you a sense of how these areas differ, so if you compare this to the wheat map, if you look at this one, this is where most of the millets are growing, but if you look at rice and wheat, it's a separate area, so they're not, they don't overlap. And that gives the potential for decentralized procurement, that gives the potential for allowing MSP to be given to millet farmers. The millet MSPs are very high, the government's been increasing them, but the possibility of selling them at MSP does not exist for a lot of millet farmers. So just to focus on, the procurement of millets, which is primarily, I said, a Karnataka story. When we break it down, what we see is that it's basically only a Karnataka story. Karnataka is the only state that has millets on scale. About 2 out of 5 kilograms of the entitlement, 2 kilograms is given, 2 to 1 kilograms is given as millet. In the north of Karnataka, there's jowar. In the south of Karnataka, there's ragi. And this is not surprising because in Karnataka, ragi has been a staple. And so, it makes sense. They're growers and people want to consume it. And so, it's possible. But other states where there is a potential to include millets in the PDS, MP, Maharashtra, Haryana, these are states where people are growing millets, but they're not being distributed in the PDS at scale. And I think this story is incomplete by understanding what's going on with millets in India in general. So this is over 50 years. What you see is in the bars, it's the area under cultivation. The yellow is 1971, green is 2021, and you see a huge increase in rice and wheat areas under cultivation, and you see an equivalent drop in the areas under millet cultivation. Similarly, if you look at the yields, which is the dot in the triangle, yields for rice and wheat have increased considerably, but yields for millet, not so much. I mean, they've increased a lot based on the possibility, but there can obviously be more work done on this end. What is important though here is to remember that we are looking at the averages, but if you look at the millet yield today, and if you look at the millet and the rice yield for upland rice, for example, those are kind of comparable. So the idea, I think it's important to mention, we have this project in Chhattisgarh where we're trying to promote millets. The idea that a rice farmer is going to stop growing rice and grow millet instead is wild. Like, it just does not make sense. We had a lot of focus group discussions. A lot of times people laughed when we suggested this because the numbers just don't stack up. It's just so much more profitable to grow rice. And so I think one area that we learned there is a potential to increase the area under cultivation is upland rice. Upland rice is very low yield. There's always a problem of irrigation, and so millets replacing that, there is a potential for that. So coming to the true cost estimates of rice, wheat, and millet, that was the purpose of this policy brief. What you see here is the green is the minimum support price that's given to farmers. Yellow is the storage and distribution cost Now, the reason why rice has a very large distribution cost is because the government buys paddy and then it processes it, and during the processing, 30% of the quantity is lost. That's why it has a large cost of processing. And so if we were looking at it as policymakers today, if we were looking at the budget, if it was the Department of Food, these are the numbers we're looking at. Rice is expensive, wheat is a little lower, and millet is somewhat similar to rice, but just a bit less expensive. But once we add the costs associated with unsustainable water use, costs associated with greenhouse gas emissions, we see that this picture changes. Now, of course, this is not what people are considering when they're making financial decisions, but I think the aim of true cost accounting is to try and get, and this is what the FAO report talks about, is to bring in this aspect into decision making to policymakers so that we can account for the negative externalities and kind of put a number to it so that it can be accounted for in our decision making. So using these numbers, we estimate what would it mean to promote millets in the PDS, and we try to use a more practical scenario, what is really possible given the limited numbers of production and procurement. And so PDS beneficiaries receive 5 kgs of food grain every month. We create a scenario where we see replacing 1 kg of rice with 1 kg of millet for only a quarter of PDS beneficiaries, so only 200 million people every month. And the reason why we focus on 200 million people is the idea that there are very strong taste preferences for rice and wheat in most parts of the country. So the idea is that initially it would only be states, on the west coast where millets are grown and millets are consumed, and so there's a potential to include them in the PDS. And so what we find is that using these numbers, there's a saving, if you're looking at true cost, there's a saving of about $771 million. And if you're looking at just the financial cost, because millet was a little less expensive than wheat, than rice, there's savings of 113 million. And this scenario would require the procurement of an additional 2.4 million tons. Now, just to sort of make sense of this number, this year the government's target was to get 2 million tons of millet. And when I used to share this in previous slides, it was the hope. But this year they didn't meet the criteria and they didn't meet the target. But I think if the government is aiming for something at the level of 2 million, 2.4 million does not sound very unrealistic in the next 4 to 5 years. It is obviously possible to increase procurement if the government invests in more procurement of millets. So the last slide. So the key takeaways are that including millets in the PDS leads to savings about 2.2% of the total true cost of the PDS, 0.6% of financial cost. These are small numbers, but the PDS budget is huge. So putting that into context, there is savings. Promoting millets in the PDS will require investments in increasing yields, increasing the area under coverage, cultivation, developing infrastructure, so procurement, storage, and processing. There's an excellent video by Folu, which was released, I think, 2 or 3 days ago. I think it's called Invisible. And it makes a very interesting point. It says, we're all talking about promoting millets, but this is basically going to create a new burden for women in having to process them. And so when we're talking about procurement, storage, and processing, we want to make sure that we're also providing technologies that allow for processing of millets at home. Finally, promoting millets to a population with strong taste preference for rice and wheat, and that's an important point. A lot of times you read articles where they say, bring millets into the PDS. I'm pretty sure a lot of states it would be a political issue, and people might not like it to have millets in the PDS because there's a strong preference for rice and wheat. Just to give you, what our future plans are. So currently we're working on adding additional metrics, power and fertilizer subsidies in economy, soil erosion and environment, and also doing a qualitative assessment of gains for millet farmers in the potential that millets are increased in the PDS. We're also looking at additional scenarios, which is savings from decentralized procurement and savings from sustainable rice and wheat production. Yes, thank you. And I have policy briefs for you, so please do keep them. One of the main aims of today's presentation and session is, because our policy brief comes out in April, we're really hoping to get feedback on what we're missing out on, if you think there's a certain metric that's not here that should be here, if you have comments on the numbers, if there's a scenario that you think that we're missing out. So we want to hear all sorts of criticisms and possible suggestions on how to make this better. So what we'll do is, I think we'll have a question and answer session. Right now, if you have questions for me, I can answer those questions. And then we'll go on to presentations by Dr. Nayak, who will talk about sustainable rice. And then Dr. Haripriya, who's going to talk about, she was one of the first people long ago to do a true cost kind of study on wheat in Punjab. And so we'll have that. And then we'll have panel discussion where we'll hear from David, and we'll hear from Mr. Ravindra, and we'll talk about local procurement. And really looking forward to hear from Mr. Ravindra, because he's been working with state governments to form millet missions to increase the production of millets and improve just the production of millets. And so it'll be interesting to see what's happening on the ground in various states. Okay.
Can you handle the question, or do you want me to moderate it?
I can handle it. Okay, any questions?
I mean, one just clarification question. You talked a bit about the air pollution. I'm not sure where that factors in. Is that under the GHG emissions bar, or is it not accounted in your kind of health aspect of the TCA? And then just a question. I mean, you put up that really interesting slide where you showed the improvements in yields for millet, through over the years, and of course is precisely because of the incentives. There's been a lot of focus on R&D for rice and wheat, and not so much on millets. What is your sense of the kind of scope for improving those yields further? What does the science suggest? Are there significant improvements that can be made on that front, or are we kind of hitting up against a frontier? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. So to answer the first question, we do have air crop residue numbers. It's hard to divide them by crop, so we haven't included it here. But in our final, the true cost of the PDS, we have that number. In fact, it's a number by Chakrabarti et al., the IFPRI paper on air crop burning. There's also a new paper now. I think the Chakrabarti paper looked at Punjab, Haryana and Delhi, but now there's a new paper that looks at Uttar Pradesh as well, and so that is part of the process. And yeah, I think one of the big challenges there has been, and this is something, just a topic of interest, is when you look at health, you often use DALYs, disability adjusted life years. Also in some cases, if you're looking at death, I think there's also the moral dilemma of how you put a monetary value to it, and so that's a whole other area that we have been looking at and trying to figure out what's the best way to do it. Some people use per capita GDP, some people use more sophisticated numbers, but again, just to highlight the point that monetizing things is not easy. It's often arbitrary, but so the idea is to harmonize and work with people who are working on TCA to come up with numbers that can be shared. About yields, great question, because I don't work on agriculture, and so I recently learned that there's a floor, a ceiling on how much yield, how much the yields of millets can be increased. And I think that, Prabhu, would you join in to answer this question? There is still scope to increase yields for millet in India, right?
Yeah. So changing hats now and putting on my hat as chairman of the board of ICRISAT, where ICRISAT is the main research institute for millets. Right now the average farm level yields are around a ton and a half, but the varieties that are available today would easily bring you up to 3.5 tons. Of course, how do you bridge that yield gap is the big story. And what's the, the rollout of varieties and the changes in agronomy practices, etc. But one of the fallacies we see is comparing millets with lowland irrigated rice. That's not the comparison. The comparison should be with upland rice. So upland rice yields are around a ton. And so when you do that comparison, millets also are better. And as the demand for millets as health food goes up and overall relative prices of millets rises, then it becomes a lot more profitable. So the work we are doing in Chhattisgarh is actually looking at replacing upland rice with millets. So that's what we do. And I know WASSAN is doing a lot of work on looking at the potential of millets, and I'm sure you'll be talking about
it. Yes, please.
So just sort of following up on the health benefits, I wonder, while we're looking at this from a cost perspective, in terms of the nutrition benefits, because this is going to be a political question in terms of how do you change the public distribution system, I wonder if doing some work on sort of quantifying the health benefits might be sort of a stronger lever in pushing some of these strategies, because in terms of the cost, it is very conservative, as you rightly say, in terms of the cost of carbon or everything else, but it turns out to be sort of significantly smaller, and I wonder if thinking about benefits from a health might be a stronger lever. So any sort of thoughts you have?
So we started with health. Health is tricky in this particular case. So if you look at the FAO report, in most places, for most countries, it's always health that's the largest cost. And a lot of it has to do with sugar consumption, diets that are not, fried foods and processed foods. In this case, one way to do this, so we are thinking about it, so this is something we've been talking a lot about. One way to do it is to look at the DALIs that could have not been lost if there was an increase in iron intake from millet, something on those lines, as a benefit. And so we are looking at that. So that is something we will ultimately include.
Yeah, and Dr. Haripriya had done, I think, a long time back in terms of the human capital and the sort of the avoided cost of the erosion of human capital because of nutrition, and I think those are significant numbers.
That's a good idea. I can do that. I know there was initially when we started this, there was a discussion over how do you put the cost for consumption of rice and wheat, and in India, particularly for PDS beneficiaries, they are consuming this rice and wheat, but if it was not provided to the PDS, they would still be consuming at least this amount of rice and wheat. So sort of talking about the health part about the rice and wheat, we decided to not do that. But I think this is a great part. I think that's a great idea, and I think we'll definitely talk about it and get an idea from you.
I just had two small questions. The first one was in your estimation of the costs of greenhouse gas emissions. Does that include the greenhouse gas emissions from the making of inputs like chemical fertilizers and pesticides? And the second one was again related to health costs. There have been a lot of studies on how overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides in rice and wheat is leading to contamination of groundwater and health diseases. So is there any way of estimating that cost on human resources and health?
Sure. So the first question, I should have a clear answer to this, but I can send you Dr. Nayak's paper. It describes all the things that I think it included till the farm gate. But did it include till farm gate? But I'm wondering, to answer your question, if it included emissions from the inputs.
But the farm gate would include emissions.
Yeah, but I think you mean the production of the inputs. Yeah. I can send you the paper, but that's a question. I should know this answer. I'm gonna make a note of it. But your next question was about pesticides or chemicals?
The health impacts of overuse of
Yeah.
chemicals.
So we haven't looked at that yet. That is something we are trying to look at. We are currently kind of stuck on just figuring out the subsidy part of it. One of the big problems with what we are doing in particular is when you're doing it at a macro level, you can get these large numbers like soil erosion in India, available. The moment you start getting to soil erosion that now or chemical impacts that you can now attribute to rice, wheat, and millet, it gets a bit complicated. But that is something we're looking at. Yes, please.
Hello Kumar, I was Food Secretary, Government of India for about 2.5 years, so I have hands-on experience on some of these. I would send you a detailed mail on what I feel about it, but I've just got 2-3 points that I want to bring to your notice. One is your costing on rice. I don't think you should use the MSP of paddy. I think you should use an equivalent cost of rice, because 2/3 of paddy gets converted. That's how we look at rice in comparison to wheat. Otherwise, you will have that big slice above, which is cost of processing, etc. That's probably, in my view, something that you may want to consider, because the farmer gets a price for the paddy, but the rice component is the basic on which you calculate that. So, if you multiply it by a factor of 1.33, then you get the effective cost of rice within the paddy, and then you can move upwards. The second thing, the big story on millets, I think Ravindra will talk about it more. I've been associated with both Karnataka and Odisha in the millet program. And it was also a fact that, we used to procure quite a bit of millets earlier. The real issue was storage. The shelf life of millets in a typical godown is about 3 months. And that's a challenge for public distribution. The second is, when we talk millets, we don't distinguish between bajra, jowar and ragi. South India will take only ragi, there is no way you can sell the rest. And most of the bajra comes from Rajasthan. So there's a bit of a regional issue there, which needs to be addressed through the decentralized procurement system. So when you do that 2.4 or whatever calculation, I strongly suggest that let's look at ragi in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu or Kerala, etc., and let's stick jowar to Maharashtra and around, and bajra to Haryana or Rajasthan and stuff like that. There's a bit, this is like the pulses story. There's a bit of a difference. The other thing is, I think we need at least about 30 million tons of production to make an impact in the PDS. Because with 16, you might procure 2, that's about it. And this can be done through a large area expansion, because there are parts of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand where farmers come and tell me that we lose the paddy crops, why don't you help us do the ragi or bajra or something. So the Odisha story is again which part of land and which farmers are able to convert to more productive kind of the millets. The rest of it, I know how that 57 happened and all that. One of the problem is the National Food Security Act, where you have committed so much. So the food secretary will be uncomfortable if he doesn't have enough stocks in the FCI. So he will resort to all kinds of things like ban on exports. All that will happen. And in a bad year, where the monsoons are erratic, it's always Punjab and Telangana and Andhra which come up with a fair share of the requirement of the central government. So there is a bit of a uncertainty factor which seems to rule this particular process. The rest I'll send to you later. Maybe we'll have a longer conversation sometime.
I've already written, make an appointment with you. So I'm going to definitely come and talk to you. Just to add to, you had said something about the cost of millets. So we did, in our calculations, we used the weighted average of millets, because mostly it's bajra. Ragi is just like a very small part. And so when we did the state level calculations, we do include, so for ragi, because ragi is very expensive and bajra is very cheap.
No, I mean, you can use an average for your calculation. What I'm saying is when we look at decentralized procurement and distribution, the regional preferences have to be taken
Of
into
course, yeah.
You can't sell bajra in Karnataka.
Oh, definitely.
No way.
Yeah.
I've tried and failed, and that's why I'm telling you this. In fact, I couldn't sell bajra in Maharashtra. Forget about. I thought they eat, and that's. In fact, I can also tell you that rejection and a lot of waste within the FCI godown is what led me to talk to ITC and introduce multigrains. So the beginning of the multigrain story in India is a failure on the public front and using a private sector to win it.
Thank you. I think Mr. Ravindra has.
Firstly, congratulations for the great work.
Thank you.
I just have a small question. You spoke a lot about environmental costs. So does that in a way also account of the nitrogen overload costs associated, or it's just the GHG emission cost?
It's just the GHG emission cost. So we're working on the nitrogen numbers. Yes.
So this yield calculation of yield in millets is very tricky because millets are niche crops. How do you calculate the yield in terms of intercrops? Many of the millets are short duration. They fill the niches in the mainstream. Say for example, if you have intercrops, mixed crops is one, and fallows is another. If you have a short fallow or if you have delayed monsoon, millets come into place. So they are not. They don't consume land per se. Many of them, I'm not saying all the millets all the time, but large part of millet do not consume land. So then per hectare cost, how you account for? Because the opportunity of millets is in the niche areas. Like you said, it's not in the lowland patch. Not just even upland patch. Entire shifting cultivation has millets. So entire drylands are millets. The rice fallows are millets. So these are all areas where you're not allocating land for food production per se. So then that is the strategic advantage of millets. Then how do you actually bring it into the calculation in the mission? So something like land equivalent ratio is probably a way of getting into that, but data on that might be a big challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, we should move to the next slide. So now we'll have Dr. Haripriya Gundimeda. She's a professor at IIT-Bombay at the Department of Economics. And as I said, she was one of the first people to work on true cost. I think you were the first person to do a true cost study in 2019, I think, on true cost of wheat in Punjab. And so she'll be talking about it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good morning to you all. Yeah. So when I talk about the true cost of wheat, basically I want to clarify that this is as a result of the true cost of rice wheat farming system that evolved in Punjab. You all know that traditionally Punjab has been wheat growing belt, but then it shifted to rice and they adopted this rice wheat farming system. As a result of it, there are several externalities which we try to quantify in this particular study. So what we mean, like, agricultural systems are quite complex if you just look at it. So they provide both positive as well as negative externalities. And also, like if you look at the positive externalities, I am pretty sure we cannot do away with agriculture. We might talk more about the negative externalities. But the key thing is, there are also positive externalities, like you have those aesthetic landscapes, recreation services, soil formation, groundwater recharge, biological control, pollination services, nutrient supply, and carbon sequestration. So when we are talking about the true cost, we have to talk about the net cost. That's the reason why I wanted to highlight the positive externalities from the agriculture. And then we also have the negative externalities in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, soil erosion, eutrophication, health impacts due to pesticide use, contamination of groundwater and surface water. So, I mean, how we actually use the agriculture, that's basically the net effect depends on what kind of practices we have in agriculture. But nevertheless, agriculture has a very important social role. We cannot actually offset that, right? The social benefits are it provides better small and marginal farmers, creates a lot of jobs. It supports systems in the form of credit, then there is technology, extension services, reviving more rural economies. All of these are the social benefits that agriculture provides. And then, there are also the impacts. Impacts mainly arise from the technological innovation. The technology has always been good in the sense of yield productivity, etc. But then it also has certain amount of cost. Now the costs are basically the negative externalities we are talking about. So it also it increases outputs, but at the same time it also increases inputs, right? Because of better hybrid yields, you also needed more water, more fertilizers and pesticides, etc. So we need to consider that as well. And as a result of which, we had an impact on the human health and environment which cannot be underwritten. And there are also social impacts due to loss in livelihoods, etc. as a result of agricultural practices. So the key thing is that definitely it's a complex and unique system, and along with more food, and agriculture and food systems have been providing more negative externalities per unit of food produce, which are not being considered in the policies, consumption behavior and producers alike. So this is a part of the work I've done as a part of the team for agri-food complexes, where we wanted to actually systematically consider all these positive as well as negative externalities, as well as impact on the human capital and the social capital as well. So we came up with, so I just want to show that, just to show the numbers, definitely there are a lot of negative externalities. This is from my own analysis of the entire data on agriculture for the state of Punjab for a period of time. So you look at that, the relation between per hectare emissions and the crop area. It's quite high. So it's not that only the small farms are emitting more or larger farms are emitting. So you do find this mixed evidence. So we got this. There is a detailed model that I used to quantify this. And then the negative externals, as you all know, you can see the depth of water level map of Punjab. It has been very gray. That's basically because of the intensive use of inputs which is required. One of the impact is you need to take more groundwater, right? So you see that this is quite severe in Punjab. And then also you have the soil nutrient deficiency. So there are many of the soils, you see the depletion of various nutrients, potassium, organic carbon and phosphorus, etc. So as a result of which, to compensate for this, we are using more of inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. So the framework, the results that I got is basically an integrated approach that I have taken. This is basically the systems perspective. Now, what is the framework that we have used? This is part of the Team Agri-Food. This is a UNEP project which we have done. So this is funded by the Global Cost Alliance, True Cost for Food as well. That's also they are doing this particular study. So if you look at it, what we looked at is we've said that there are four kinds of capital which are actually providing feeding into the agriculture. That is the natural capital, produce capital, human capital and social capital. And there are various inputs. The inputs are also there are some, you also need to consider ecosystem services. That is also one of the key input. Usually we ignore that in the decision making framework, but we need to include that as well. So we have categories of inputs into purchased inputs, then you have agriculture and food outputs, residuals and ecosystem, and there is interconnectivity among them which we need to model. And then we have the stocks, then there are dependencies, flows and outcomes and impacts. This is a framework we use. And then as a result of which, as a result of agriculture value food chain, there are various contributions to human well-being from the natural capital, produce capital, human capital and social capital. So basically this is the entire framework that we have used. We have not left any capital, any impact. So it's just the entire framework systems perspective we have taken. And so I'm not going because I just have 10 minutes. I just thought I'll quickly go into the results. So what we found, like this is the value of output, which is like whatever value of wheat that is being produced. Then there is also value of straw, which is a byproduct from the production process, which is valued. So if you look at it, this is basically the, mind here, the numbers are basically the economic values, not accounting values. For example, when you mean economic values, the value as it is also includes opportunity cost sometimes. For example, electricity is free, don't pay, literally is a zero. But then if you try and value the value of electricity, then there is some value to that. So if you look at the subsidies free electricity to the extent of your 57,528 million, which has been costed. Then the irrigation charges, fertilizer, pesticides, machinery, and then not only that, the rental value of owned and leased land. So you also have to consider that value. Then the interest on fixed capital, interest on working capital. These are all the costs that is giving this value of output, value of stock, which is what we see in the accounting system. But then it has a lot of negative externalities in terms of the emissions. We have quantified more emissions and just didn't give. They are minute in terms of other emissions. So you see that methane, then you have CO2, NH3, NH4, N2O, NOx, etc. And which also has various impacts on the environment. These have been valued. So this is the cost versus the residues, and then we have the value chain. So the value chain is basically from the gross value of output. We looked at the gross value of wheat consumed, stored, or in kind by the farmer, because they also store certain amount of seeds, and they also consume certain part of this. Then then there is the gross value procured, then which is processed, traded, and there are transport margins which are added, then that gives to value addition after milling. So that's basically the value, and there are emissions at each and every stage. But remember, the data set is so, I mean, it's even to put together this amount of data, I had to really struggle hard. So the data is all over, it's not very, but then we try to get as much as possible to get this particular case. What we estimated was for each 1 rupee of wheat procured, the additional value added is 0.44 rupees. That means it will be 1.44. So because there is also processing, there are many people who are actually benefiting out of it. Now look at the impacts. So we are not looking at only the economic impacts. Remember, impacts can be on any sector, right? We have economic impacts, which will be like depreciation, implements, and farm buildings. Then there is also gross capital formation, which is good, right? It is benefiting the economy because you are buying new agricultural implements that is leading to the gross capital formation, which is it increases the GDP. So that's the impacts we have quantified. How much in terms of depreciation also has been quantified. Then we have the environmental impacts, which is basically loss in soil carbon. 60% soil carbon is lost as a result of this rice wheat farming system in Punjab. So the soils are depleted. So we have, as a result of which there is decline in soil fertility. Mind you, this is very difficult to quantify unless, but then we model that using additional costs of fertilizers that the farmers have to use. Then there is groundwater depletion, which reacts into 9.72 million cubic meters. Then eutrophication, which is 6.24 million tons of NOx equivalent, GHG emissions. So these are all quantified in terms of the physical units because we do not want to go into separately accounting for this because some of the things can be best understood by using the physical quantities rather than putting a money value because this we want to model it as a system, then it would actually translate into costs. So that the human capital in the terms there is improved livelihoods because of agriculture, because many people are benefiting out of it, we need to value. There are very positive impacts as well. So we looked at on an average 23, this is basically the positive impact it has created on the livelihoods in terms of agriculture. Then increased, but then there are also negative impacts in terms of the increased occupational health risk because when the farmers spray the pesticides, they also have negative impacts. Then you have the social capital, it's increased employment, then there are many workforce employed and also minimum support price which the government is actually providing to benefit the farmers. So all of these are the social benefits and the costs. So that's how we wanted to quantify the true cost of, basically the net cost of Punjab wheat production system. So if you look at all of these would ultimately have an impact on the well-being. So if you look at the economic, environment, human and social capitals, then we have the agricultural GSDP. Out of this is basically the contribution, of which also, like, remember, it's just not one sector. It also contributes to industry growth. Like, without agriculture, Mahindra would not be able to produce tractors, right? So we need to actually look at, like, there are so many forward linkages, like spillovers which are created as a result of this agricultural sector, which we need to model. So the contribution to industry growth is 3,069 million. Then the contribution to service growth. There are many industries which are actually employed. Agri-processing industries are all service-based industries. So you have, all of these have to be accounted for. Then we also look at the subsidies on the fertilizers and the subsidy burden due to decreasing water tables. So these are basically various quantification that we have done and the impact, positive and net impact on the well-being. Then we have the environment. In the environment, there is loss in farmers' income due to expenditures on soil nutrients because they have to now use, ultimately it is eating away into the disposable income of the farmers, right? The income they have to, otherwise the soils would have been more fertile, they would have saved more. They wouldn't have to spend a lot on fertilizers, right? So then there are carbon abatement costs because of the carbon. So this is, by meaning carbon is not CO2 alone, I have actually converted everything in terms of the greenhouse gas equivalent. So the CH4, CO, NOx emissions, everything has been converted in terms of carbon equivalents. Then you have the human, which are the health costs from stubble burning, which is around 1950 million. This basically involves, we have modeled actually the air pollution in Delhi, especially because of the stubble burning. I think I have collected data for almost 20 years on the pollution, and we modeled that to understand what is the impact on the human health. So then there are incidents of cancer due to exposure to pesticides as well, which is around 37. This is only like, we are considered only those toxic pesticides which would definitely have an impact on it. We look at all the pesticides and the potent chemical in that, and then see like which of that would have an impact, which would be like cancer creating toxic. Of course, the estimates can be questioned, but then we just looked at that, those are conservative estimate. Then we have the social capital, which is increased access to food, but that's a social security issue. We will not say that agriculture is bad. It leads to actually security, which is very important. So there is increased access to food. So 11.5 million tons are actually created to the central pool from Punjab alone. And so there are also, like, if you look at the impact, the spillovers I'm talking about, so there's so many dealers in seeds, pesticides, cooperative societies which are actually benefiting out of agriculture. They all will be jobless, right? So we need to, that's the reason why we need to actually consider all these together in order to like talk about the real true cost of food or what we are considering. So this is my presentation and thank you very much. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Actually, they just called us for tea, right? It's 11:30. So maybe we could do the rice presentation and then take the questions. So we take a tea break. Can we take like a 5-minute tea break? This was supposed to be a 3-hour session and we found out it was 2.5. So trying to. Hi everyone, welcome back. So what we'll do is we'll have the sustainable rice presentation, and then we'll take questions for both Dr. Haripriya and Dr. Nayak. Sir, please welcome to the stage.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation was on production. And I think, okay. So all of us after wheat, the rice is one of the important backbone of Indian food security. 65% of the population feeds 65% of the population, grown by 56% of the farmer, livelihood of 50% of the poor, and annual value 53 billion. And it is harvested from 43 million hectares. I think Dr. Raghav mentioned 46 million hectares. I think rice area is stabilized around 43 million hectares over the years. And yet it is consuming 37% of the total fertilizer in agriculture sector. 14. Okay. So rice has increased from 0.7 ton per hectare from 1970 to 2.2, more than 3 times. And the area has been same throughout the year. And rice has been helpful for making transportation in various sectors. Poverty elevation, rural entrepreneurship, employment generation, rural infrastructure development, several transformation rice has made. And the rice sector is facing several constraints. Infrastructure constraint, land fragmentation, access to credit, climate change vulnerability, market access, price volatility, competitive global market, policy reform regulations, and sustainability concern. These are the challenges with the rice sector. And the rice sector also seen several policy changes over the year, starting from green revolution policy to the sustainable initiative. These are the policy migrations of Indian. But what rice has done a negative impact, those are the positive impact that has been made in the society. Negative impact, Indian agriculture contribute around 17% to GHG emission, and rice contribute around 16.9-17% of GHG emission. But if you see, what is the carbon footprint, and this is one paper that was used by Raghav for doing the hidden cost calculations. The average carbon footprint is 2.4 per ton per carbon dioxide, but if you see Punjab is having highest your GHG emission, that is 4.91 ton per hectare. We can see other states are having very low GHG emission, usually they are taking rice. And coming to water footprint, again, though we are in the global average, but still rice is water guzzling crop and higher water footprint in Indian conditions. And here the EB value, that is beneficial irrigation efficiency, is less than 30 because of surface irrigation in rice. And we have calculated the water footprint. Different states, you can see blue water footprint is very high in state of Punjab, Rajasthan, Haryana. So green water footprint, if you see that the eastern part and southern part, and that is the most suitable area for growing rice, because most of the water requirement is met from the rainfall. Again, if you see, this is another cost that is coming. Recent year we have exported to the tune of 21 million ton of rice, and it costs with export of virtual water, and it is having certain cost. While calculating hidden cost, whether we will have to use this virtual cost into those calculations. Similarly, nitrogen, 37% of the total fertilizer used by rice sector, and we have calculated the nitrogen use efficiency of rice in India in the visual analysis. You can see the recovery agronomic use efficiency is 18 kg, and recovery efficiency around 42.6% respectively. So a lot of nitrogen is lost. Those are reactive nitrogen lost to the environment, and it is having a lot of environmental cost. Similarly, one important aspect which we have done, the eutrophication map we have prepared, and we are acidification and other map, we are in the process of making those things. If you see the reactive nitrogen loss from paddy field, emission from nitrogen, kg per ton, nitrate and nitrous oxide, these are the state-wise data. And again the cost, Indian Nitrogen Initiative has done a cost analysis for health cost, ecosystem cost, and the climate cost of this reactive nitrogen. And these, again, the rice sector is faced by several climatic changes. We have tried to do some cost calculations as it is done by others. This is the initial stage of doing those cost calculations. We have taken cost of GHG emission and reactive nitrogen also into the account. And this is the cost of production of milled rice, hidden cost 1 and hidden cost 2. If you see the transportation and storage, other costs are in cost 1 and cost 2 is the environmental cost. And so hidden cost 2, we have calculation the cost of production of milled rice, hidden cost 1 and hidden cost 2. The environmental cost is constituting more to the total cost. And these are the potential options are available for reducing water footprint. A lot of work have been done, but it will be having some ecological ecosystem and specific ecology requires a specific kind of technology. It's not a pan-Indian kind of recommendations, but these technology, when it will be leveraged, we can reduce the water footprint. Similarly, what are the technology they are applicable tested for reducing the carbon footprint? If it is followed in the rice wheat system, it reduces. Similarly, potential options for reducing nitrogen footprint, site-specific nutrient management, nitrogen water irrigation management, customized deep color chart, then optical sensor, drip fertigation, deep placement of urea briquette. So this reduces substantial amount of losses that we incur from rice system. So transition pathway for reducing environmental footprint in rice, double cropping rice, polling and transplanting, blanket fertilizer application, flood irrigation, and the traditional variety. So modern practices diversifying the second crop, direct seeded rice, precision and site-specific nutrient management, alternative wet and dry method, improved and hybrid varieties. And the way forward for sustainability of rice production system, we need to take leverage of genetic gain, that is some of the tolerant, stagnant flooding, droughts, tolerant varieties, multiple state tolerant varieties, then anaerobic germination varieties, nutritious high-yielding variety, and several best management practices. We will have to take leveraging of site-specific nutrient management, improve seed system. Then we will have to take crop diversification, less water requiring crop, dry season crop, and conservation agriculture, system-based recommendations, forgoing fellows, and decision support system tools. If those things are taken leverage, I think we will be achieving the goal of sustainability in rice sector. Thank you very much. If there are some questions, I will be happy to answer.
Maybe we could have all the panelists come up.
Sure.
On rice and wheat systems, and really quantifying the environmental costs and the social costs. So maybe we can start with a few questions specifically around that. And then I'll ask my other two panelists to also make some comments, and then we'll have an open discussion. So do we have questions specifically for Dr. Haripriya and Dr. Nayak? Do you have a question?
So I think both those presentations were very helpful, particularly for the future of our project, because we're trying to see what are the way forward for making rice and wheat sustainable. But for both of you, I think one of the big problems with looking at possible solutions is they all sound really good. Sprinkler irrigation, AI and drones and all sorts of new options available. But at scale, so if you're looking at, in our case, PDS rice and wheat, what would you think for rice and for wheat are maybe the top, like 1 and 2 number solutions that can be scaled up and that can be easily implemented? Or what is the problem that's stopping it from happening? So just to give you an example, alternate wetting and drying. When you hear about it, it just makes so much sense. Everybody should do it. It saves water, increases yield, but it doesn't happen as commonly. So for both of you, for rice and wheat, what do you think is the best option that has the best potential to scale up?
So the options which were listed here, they are having a present connotation also, what are the things that is feasible in the present context. But when we want to move future, to the futuristic technology also, they need to be upscaled, and that too in a contextual basis, where the farmers are ready to do, where the scalability is there, so that will be there. But question is, if you want to go scaling, reducing the environmental footprint, your DSR, the direct seeded rice as well as alternative wheating dry, because there will be less cost, and the drivers will be to reduce the cost of cultivation by 25%. If the technology is given in the bundle technology across the rainfed and the irrigated ecology. But question is, there are barriers also. So why it is not moving? It is easier. But India is having 50% of rainfed area and 50% of irrigated area. But 50% of rainfed area, talking about DSR, direct seeded rice, it does not help farmer, because farmers, they raise the field bound by 50 centimeters, 75 centimeters to store additional amount of water for the dry spell. Because they don't have insurance against the failure of your rain. So that's why there it is not possible. But question is, if you do have a better weather prediction, so mid-season drainage also is having tremendous contribution to the reduction of methane. But if you are talking about your irrigated area where even supplemental irrigation is possible, alternative wetting drying is a feasible option. But here the location specific is one of the important aspects. But question is, if you ask why DSR is not going on, because there are a lot of barriers also. Because DSR, if you do not have a appropriate wood management practice, agronomy, then the farmer, whatever the cost saving is done by switching from transplanting to sowing, direct sowing, that will be taken away by the manual weeding. So there will be loss of yield in DSR. So DSR is not a single technology, it is a bundle technology, where mechanization, your line sowing, as well as appropriate wood management practices and nutrient management, if it is bundled, and given that DSR gives at per yield, and it is having a lot of reduction in environmental potential.
Yeah, what I found the main problem was because of the lopsided policies. I think we can come up with solutions later on, but we also need to clean up our house. That's the clean. Now, if you just look at from the 1970s, the revolution, so the quantity of the wheat, rice and wheat has shown because of the policies of the government, the minimum support price is 1. So that actually gave an advantage in the sense, okay, fine, so that looked very lucrative. So that, like you said, in Punjab, the rest of the crops, like sarson ka saag, that's used to be the, you see the movies but then that also the production has declined. Because you really do not it's not that profitable, right? So the farmers got one is the signaling effect. They are given a wrong signaling effect that rice and wheat were the only ones which are actually lucrative and good. Second thing, we have HYVs, right? High yielding varieties, and especially the rice, which is both good and bad. Good in the sense like you have short season crops, now 3 or 4 months. I plant it in saplings and I have it in June, once it rains, and October I'm forced to harvest. The 3-month varieties were very popular, right? But then I have very short season for wheat. The reason why all the mishap happens in Delhi, pollution, is because now I have this, this short season I want to make it, so I put rice, I also get higher support price, and then I go to the wheat, but I have only 3 weeks window because I already have the wheat season times, the dates are fixed. You have to maximize the harvest. So that's the reason why, and then the technology which actually spreads the stuff all around the field, and it's very difficult for the farmers to remove that because, and then if you have to link it to the labor policies, empty the labor policy, you have the minimum wage itself. And so the labor has become extremely expensive, and there's huge demand for labor during that particular time, right? So the farmers do not actually have the availability of labor, they find burning of the fields very difficult. So that's basically, so you see how these three policies are actually bundled up. Now the second set of policy has to do with the free electricity. Now I'm not having an incentive to conserve electricity. Now I have this, if you look at the data we have seen, the number of tube wells have increased drastically over a period of time. Why? If you look at the agriculture bills, they don't really need to pay much of it. Now I do not have an incentive, I actually keep on drawing, so I do not use any water saving crop in my field, right? So that's another key problem. Now on the one hand, I'm encouraging the farmers to use more of subsidy, more of the free imports. So if you do not control your electricity, I'm giving negative impact on the water. I'm drawing up more water and which have impacts for the groundwater and other sort of problems, right? And the fertilizer subsidies. Now we are giving MSP for the wheat and rice. Now, are we encouraging, like if you look at entire distribution channel, there is no production practice, there is no kind of support system for promoting agriculture or organic products. And why am I not encouraging this? Why am I not giving higher MSP for the organic production? It's not there in the system. Now you try to create a favorable system for the farmers and they will automatically switch. You don't even need to create anything else. Farmers are rational. But it's that they go by the incentive system. So the incentives are basically we're disincentivizing that sustainable agriculture. So that is a key problem which we need to address.
Thank you. I think what you say about incentives is music to my ears as an economist. It's a problem we've been facing for the last 40 years. How do you transition from a staple grain policy to a more diversified production system policy? Even while we have technologies there to be smarter about farming, we're not able to get there. Let me, instead of taking more questions, I want to go to the other two panelists and listen from them. And then we can open up to a broader discussion. So we have Dr. Ravindra Adusumilli, who is the head of WASSAN. WASSAN has done some really interesting work on natural farming, rain-fed agriculture systems, and is leading the efforts on millet production and promoting millet production in Odisha and in some of the other states in India. And he comes with a lot of experience in this area. And our second panelist here is David Hogg. David Hogg is originally from New Zealand, but he's lived in Hyderabad for 40 years?
Total 52 years.
52 years, so he's Indian origin. And David has been doing a lot of work on regenerative agriculture, carbon credits, etc. And I had an opportunity to visit some of the work that he's been doing on coffee plantations in Andhra area, Aruku Valley. And most of you have heard of the Aruku Valley coffee. So David's been the man behind that. So let me start with Ravindra and get your comments.
See, to start with, so we have been working on millets as a part of, we started with natural resource management and we ended up without looking at production system, natural resource management doesn't happen. So started working on production systems, then landed up in millets in the Thailand regions and all that. So in the WASSAN and revitalizing rain-fed agriculture network, part of these organizations, we started working on millets since 2007 and all that. Lots of learnings over time resulted into this kind of a formulation in Odisha Millet Mission, which basically says, no, you have to, if you want to address the millets issue, you have to address the issues of consumption, production, processing and marketing simultaneously in a defined geography. Without that, it becomes locked up into chicken and program. You can never solve the problem. That has been the experience for over a decade. So at present, last year, millets were introduced into, ragi is introduced into full PDS system, and there are 6 lakh quintals of ragi is procured by the government from 60,000 farmers out of the production, all that. So the incentive systems and the design was all there. So when we started, the fundamental problem here is, with PDS in rice and wheat, we have shifted the entire landscapes, the food landscapes. When the country's dryland agriculture, all the rain-fed areas, tribal areas, all these areas which used to consume millets, you have actually shifted the rice into those systems, and then made it a national sort of this thing. So there's a huge transformation, and then there is an economy around PDS. 40% of rice is purchased by the government. The huge infrastructure investment happened over a period of so many years, and then all that actually positioned vis-a-vis the millets now. So now at this stage, if you want to look at the millets as a system, say for example, you need to see the ridiculousness of the policy frame. In Telangana, water is lifted from Godavari river, and in multi-stages, probably 200 meters above, and then supplied through canals and all that to grow rice, which the lands are not meant for rice, converted the entire lands into rice, and then there is a abundance of paddy, and then the state government is now asking central government to procure. So the cost of that, how do you actually build, the cost of it, how you assess, then the whole policy discourse around it. And then second part of it is if you invest 2 crores, 2.5 crores on fertilizer subsidy, only 30% is used by the crops, 70% is leached off, which means 1.75 crores of investments in fertilizer subsidy is actually not used. It's contributing to the pollution. So, and then 40% of that is paddy probably, and then 40% of this is procured. So the policy frame, from green revolution to the current situation, has enormous anomalies, and these distortions happen in several ways. So if you look at the opportunity of millets, one thing is paddy versus millets, paddy wheat versus millets is one way of looking at it. But if you look at what are the opportunities of moving to millets, at least 25% of the PDS system if it moves to millet. So we estimated that in Andhra Pradesh, if you take the total PDS consumption, PDS procurement and consumption, then if you shift 25% to millets, you can save water which is equivalent to a Polavaram dam. 75 TMC is the capacity of the dam, the water. So you can actually save 105 TMC of water if you can actually affect 25% of PDS into that, which means 1 kg per month per cart, 1.25 kg. So if you can engineer this kind of a shift, then there's a huge economic benefits around it. So it is not that farmers' behavior is an issue. My mother never ate wheat, never saw wheat for 30 years or 40 years of her life. In entire south, wheat was introduced. There's a behavioral shift. So paddy was never so much of the staple in the tribal areas. So it was never the staple. It was made. People are made to eat. All the dry land people are made to eat rice and wheat. So that is all behavioral shift. It came with the economy and investments and compulsions probably. But at this time, behavioral issue is a problem. Is something that economists really has to see whether it's a function of investments and strategies, particularly when you are having the nutrition problems and all the problems, climate change problems, nutrition problems, water problems, the fertilizer subsidies, the fiscal crisis. Everything is related to these policies. Now, how we can look at opportunities of correcting that. So this is the first part. Then we know all this. I won't repeat that thing. Simple experiments. We did one experiment in Asifabad district of Telangana district, along with Niti Aayog supported program, along with the district collector. Introduced millets into the Anganwadi system and popularizing in the local consumption with production. So the district collector actually asked their DHOs to sort of monitor the anemia levels, the iron levels in the system. 6 months they could report a change. It's simple. The sama, the little millet has high iron, calcium, zinc, and you can actually specifically address the nutritional problems with specific millet typologies across. But if the ICDS wants to introduce millets into it, that is dependent on the PDS system. That is dependent because the entire Anganwadi system, ICDS system, draws its rice and wheat from the subsidized public distribution system. So if the district collector wants to introduce millets into the replace millets with rice, rice with millets in the ICDS system, then the district collector has to purchase millets at 40-50 rupees a kilo instead of getting it 1 rupee kilo and then introduce. So though you have the entire understanding of millets and its impact on nutrition, simply it's not possible, but because the entire nutritional program, supplementary nutrition program, is serviced by the PDS system. So where are we? And then we talk about food fortification. So the golden rice. Now you can easily solve the anemia problems if you actually target production, consumption locally, and some percentage crop diversification. So 80-90% of the farmers are small and marginal and farm laborers. So nutrition problems of them, theirs, can easily be addressed if you have a production millet integration, millets and pulses integration into the production system, and then they can produce and eat. That's a large chunk of the country. So these opportunities are there, but because of the complex lockup that we have in the policies in the country, so we are locked up in it. Then the lastly, I will end up with one thing. So what is the course ahead? So do we, even if you want to introduce millets into the system, do we go the green division way, looking at varieties, millet varieties as introducing millet varieties as the game changer, increasing productivity of millets as a monocrop, and with fertilizers and with herbicides. And this is the recommendations. Even now you see IIMR's recommendations, package of practices. These are the practices. So we have almost 1,000 plots in tribal areas where we are getting the productivity up to 2 tons per hectare in millets without using fertilizers, without using pesticides, without using irrigation also, rainfall. So the yield comparisons, when you do, it's all very mysterious calculations, because in the tribal areas, large part of millets is basically broadcast and harvest. There is no agronomy there because it's in the marginal lands, in the uplands and all that. So you are comparing that kind of a system with a system that is subsidized 200 times by government, rice and wheat, and you comparing yields and then say this system doesn't have is low productive. Simply invest on agronomy. Varieties, we clearly say the traditional varieties, lots of thousands of farmers data we can also produce. So using traditional varieties, better agronomy without chemicals can yield at par yields. At least if you take a state level average, something like Telangana, you can achieve that in the minutes. So that part is there. So the course in which we need to move is not the course that the green revolution drives us in millets. So second part is, if you want to introduce it to the public distribution system. So now the distribution system is, PDS is meant for, you produce, you procure the grain, millet, and then move the milled rice, store it and distribute. So if you follow the same thing in millets, it will be disaster. Because like once I said, the storage life is very short. You cannot manage millets in the public distribution system as it is now. So you need to have a different concept of infrastructure for millets. So millets are locally produced. There is any block in India can produce millets sufficient for its own consumption. There is no block which cannot produce. No, when we are talking about 25%, 20% kind of introduction. So the production, procurement, storage, processing has to happen locally. So even when you can consider distributing raw grains rather than processed millets. Raw millets you can store for 10 years. Nothing will happen to it. Once you mill, 10 days, 15 days is also a big challenge. So why not we actually have reconceptualize the entire public distribution system from the procurement, from the production to infrastructure to processing and reaching a dollar sort. So you can have mills at the MLS points, the final distribution points of the PDS system. You can move the raw material up to that stage, have a processing mill, and then supply there locally. And then MLS point can actually procure all the mills that is required. It's such a simple system if you can actually remove this mindset of the existing PDS and think afresh. It's a very simple system. Production is there, productivity is there, procurement is possible. Now demand is there. Now we are having so many millet enterprises promoted. Now the little millet price, raw grain price is 60 rupees. Foxtail millet. Little millet is 45 rupees. Rice is 15 rupees. Now there is a price. There is a consumer voting also. It's changing. But we should not be depending on the past data and then mindsets of the green revolution and then think about millets. We need to change. We need to have a different view of millets. This is in country what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. That was really great because I think when we think about how do you transform food systems, you can transform by repeating the past models, create new models. So the idea that millets have to be locally procured, locally produced is a good reminder for all of us. David, you've been in this business of regenerative agriculture for a long time, and you've addressed some of these issues around local procurement, etc. Maybe your thoughts on these matters. There's a mic.
Thank you, Professor Pingali. Pleasure to be here and share some thoughts. As I spoke earlier, it's been a kind of like just over 52 years journey in the experience of Indian agriculture, and it's a complex animal. I started in Tamil Nadu, and interestingly enough, Ravindra has mentioned about the changes in our food habits. The first 10 years, I lived in a little village in Tamil Nadu, Pachantikulam, and every breakfast was ragi. It was, we would parboil the ragi in the night, and then in the morning you'd have that fermented ragi, and just about everything you need in terms of your B vitamins and everything came out of that, And so I mapped Tamil Nadu. I lived in Tamil Nadu for the first 30 years, and I watched the transition of food habits, which were largely as a result of the implementation of the PDS system. For instance, I'll give an example. Well, today, for instance, you have children not eating fermented ragi in the morning. They're having little buns of modern bread, full of sugar, full of empty carbohydrates, and it's tragic in terms of the true cost of accounting. I mean, it's tragic. I'll give it an example. I ran a dairy for many years, and I needed a lot of rice bran, wheat bran, and so I had a connection in Dindigul with a mill. And during the 80s and 90s, what I saw was, because of the shortage of rice, the PDS system was pushing wheat down into Tamil Nadu and actually trying to change the habits of the Tamils in terms of their rice to start eating a little bit of wheat. And it succeeded. It was quite amazing. It was subsidized. I mean, the cost was enormous to the exchequer, but what happened is they set up mills, and the mills people were trained by the Millers Association of America, not a good thing. And they set up mills, and one of them was in Dindigul that I knew very well, the management there, and they were taking all the wheat that was supplied from the PDS system from Punjab and converting that wheat into maida. and then supplying it into the Tamil system, into the food system as maida, empty carbohydrates, and then we had this paratha, which was then mixed with oil, and suddenly the whole cuisine of Tamil Nadu changed overnight. It was quite amazing. And then when you had the consequences of that in terms of health was these headlines, which happened. There was a lag time of about 5 years, and then you had these headlines saying Tamils are genetically prone to diabetes, and nobody looked at the connections. And to my dismay, I was watching all this. I had a great deal of interest in food nutrition, and I watched this with so much dismay that we were basically, there was an attrition of the basic health of the Tamils. And no doubt a similar thing was happening all over the country in different ways. But let me just get back to the regenerative agricultural hobby horse of mine, if I can put it like that. I just wanted to make the point that there's one big elephant in the room when we talk about PDS. We are talking about agriculture. As Wendell Berry once said, eating is an agricultural act. And in our economics document, we say agriculture is an ecological act. It can be either good or bad, and the consequences of that are enormous for the country. So just to talk about the elephant in the room, and I was so happy to see Dr. Haripriya mention that just in one of her slides was that 60% of the soil carbon has been lost in India. And to my mind, it's probably an underestimate, because soil carbon equals water. We really don't see it in those terms, because the water in soil carbon is intangible. We don't see it, but it's tangible to the plants, but it's not tangible to people and to our eyesight. So when we talk about all of these adjustments in terms of water usage, micro sprinklers, wetting, drying, and all of those things, these are above ground technologies which are needed. But I think the biggest technology, was the great unseen, the elephant in the room, is addressing the soil carbon. And in the sidelights of this whole PDS problem in India, or the challenge of transforming it, has been this other elephant in the room, the Kyoto Protocol, and our greenhouse gas emissions and carbon. And 35% of our carbon loss into the atmosphere comes from agriculture. So how do we address that? And my CEO of Naandi Foundation, he had this vision, a very powerful one for me, that how do we take this extraordinary organization called the PDS system and turn it into, instead of into a negative, turn it into a positive, where we look at all the different components of it in terms of addressing agricultural methods, tangible and intangible water, soil, organic carbon equals water. Every 1% of soil organic carbon equals, when it rains, a storage of about 130,000 liters of water per hectare. Now, when you look at the 60% loss of soil organic carbon, it means that we've got, like, for instance, in the Punjab, where I worked for many years in different fields in Moga district and other areas, just studying what happened to our soil carbon as a consequence of supplying all of these grains into the FCI. And the main consequence is the loss of soil carbon. So when I was alarmingly started measuring these soil carbon levels in Punjab, and finding in some cases, particularly in Moga district, it was like 0.1%, which means no water storage. And when we talked to the farmers in the Punjab, they were alarmed at the idea that they have to do watering every second, third, or maybe at minimum once a week. So then all of the consequences of putting in pump sets all over the state, pumping out the water, and then facing a zero water situation probably by the year 2050. So what do we do at that point? So these are some of the extraordinary things that are a consequence of a wrong or sort of a misplaced ideas about our agriculture, that it's not about looking at the production, but it's about the methods. And when you look at the Kyoto Protocol and how it's evolved over the last decades, they have methodologies there which particularly address this element of soil carbon. So you can actually do an agriculture, measure your methodology, and get you get carbon credits for it. So this kind of opportunity, to me, if we dovetail it into the PDS system and transform it into an ecological movement, this is the vision that our CEO has, where it could be a game changer in terms of policy change, which means that we could have trees growing at the same time, we could have food crop addressing soil carbon, change our methodologies, address the soil carbon issues, and also all of the finer points that, regarding cuisine. Some people don't want to eat millets, but look at those things. If we can turn the Tamils to a wheat consuming state in the space of 10 years, then we can certainly start working with the entire India on looking at different healthy ways of eating. And I think everybody's concerned about their health. I think it's the one common denominator. And if we know the implications of what we're doing and what we're eating, I think we can have a sea change in terms of our habits, of our cuisine habits, of our eating habits, and as a result of that, our agricultural habits. So just to give you an insight into some of the experiences I had in the working in the tribal region of Araku. When 20 years ago, when I began working there, there was a very, very, very poor quality coffee coming out of there, because there was no value chain connect. There was just traders and money lenders there taking off poor quality coffee, and it was called disparagingly by the coffee board a non-traditional coffee growing area. And so I went there and I discussed it with Naandi, and I said, look, the place is perfect for growing coffee. It could be a flagship. It could be a way for tribal farmers to make cash, because they need cash. They said, if we want to send our children to school, particularly our girls, we need to have cash in our pockets, because we can't just live on subsistence anymore. So we worked on the coffee with them, and it was organically certified. We raised the soil carbon levels, so the water storage as a result of that came in. All our microbial content of our soil increased. The quality of the coffee increased until we have a world brand recognized throughout the world as Araku coffee. And it was only took us like 15 years to turn that round. Imagine if we, with a government policy in hand, with utilizing all the power of the government in terms of habit changes, we could turn all of our food crops into healthy crops, not having to worry about arsenic and rice, about high nitrates in our food crops that are subsidized by the government to do such things. And so I think the opportunity to transform this animal called, this complex animal called PDS into a positive environmental change for India is one of the visions we have in Naandi, and look forward to that, because when we first assessed the area in terms just for Araku, there was no there was no millets traded. And here I must agree with Ravindraji in terms of his assessment of millets. There was no extra millets grown. It was grown as a food crop. But then when we did some assessments, when we got funding for a carbon program, working with European companies, and were able to got some generous funding to see what we could do next in terms of how do we get the soil carbon into the ground, and how do we turn it into monetize it into a carbon credits, and how do we then work with the livelihoods of the farmers. Suddenly all the farmers said, oh, if you take our millets, we can grow it. We're experts at growing millets. And it wasn't that it was taking up other space, it was on these residual lands. It was on these rain-fed lands which didn't take over any other agricultural areas. And at the same time, you could have rajmas, you could have pulses, which is one great shortage in India. And suddenly now we've got, next year, we'll be producing 2,000 tons of saleable foxtail millets and finger millets for the market. And in about 4 years, we'll have 10,000 tons. And that's from an area, from 11 mandals of article, not sending out any millets into the mainstream. Suddenly you're talking about 10, 15 million tons just of millets alone, not to mention all the pulses and the rajmas and the spices, the turmeric, the ginger and whatnot. So what I'm seeing is that we're at the point where if we change this animal and turn it into an ecological movement, I see enormous potential for, first of all, addressing the nitrate problems in our water, which is serious. We've got Tamil Nadu, we have blue baby syndrome. I know in Punjab it's there. The nitrate issues are serious. So in terms of true cost, I mean, I don't think there's any accounting system that could really take all of those true costs, as we spoke about, into account to really make a decision in terms of changing the agriculture for India. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Great comments. I think the idea of thinking about the future PDS as something where you dovetail with the idea of green credits that are being talked about now, maybe one way in which you can address the incentive problems. I think that's a good vision of your CEO, Kumar. And that's certainly worth thinking about something. Let me open up the floor for a broader set of questions or comments. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. It was a delight to listen to all the presentations, and it's actually an eye-opener also. It's a comment more like, and maybe anybody on the floor can respond. I just wanted to draw your attention to one more factor, I think, which contributes to focus on rice production, which is India's constant focus on exporting rice. And in 2015-2016, when the then finance minister came up with an agricultural export policy, there was a specific focus that India should be seen as a reliable supplier of some of the goods, and rice was considered as the topmost priority. And as it was discussed yesterday also, India has actually become one of the largest exporters of the world, and it has surpassed many other countries. I think that has a great deal of impact on what farmers in India are growing. For example, if you look at Punjab, the limited knowledge which I have through my field work and exposure with the farmer interactions, there are two major varieties which Punjab farmers are growing. One is the basmati rice, and then the other one is what they call as 1121 variety, Gara 21 Parmal rice. Now both these varieties are not consumed in Punjab or even in the nearby areas. So and a lot of focus of Punjab farmers have been that basmati rice is something which India exports, and therefore it provides them good returns. So I think it will be useful if apart from PDS we also look at India's changing priorities in export and focus more on rice as one of the commodity. I just wanted to put it on the table. Thank you.
Of course, India is exporting because we had an experience during 1960 to 70 when India was going at the beginning rice. It was denied. That was a ship to mouth economy. And that impetus is there in the mind of our policymaker. Now we are exporting around 21 million hectares to the 40 countries. Well, last year, your food crisis, the global food crisis, when India stopped exporting rice, there was a hue and cry internationally why India is stopping exporting rice. Because India stopped exporting rice, because some of the hoarders in Middle East, they were recruiting. It was really not going to the poor country. So finally what was done, so bilateral country-to-country agreement was made. It's not that at present rice is having negative impact, it is having environmental consequences. At the same time, it is the backbone of India's food security. If you 1 year or 2 year, there will be some bad year, natural disaster, then our policymakers will run from pillar to post to ensure supply of the food to poor. So, of course, we will have to address the negative externalities that is coming to the foods and rice sector. Attempts have been made in Punjab, diversifying rice to maize and cotton. Government of Punjab and Government of Haryana is giving 6,000 rupees additionally if a farmer is agreeing to ship from rice to other crop. But we do have other issues also. When free water supply, if any government will now think of in Punjab to do away with free water supply, that government will go. And you have seen 3 agricultural bill that was brought by the central government. It's not that the policy initiative is not taken by the central government. They are taking. But the thing is, it is not a simple issue looking into from angle of environmental externalities. It is associated with the people's livelihood. Then it is associated with the income. 40% of our poor are depending upon their livelihood on the rice sector. The figure I presented. So it is the headache of a politician. If they are not getting good price, then your consumers are having problem, producers are having problem. So with these issues, it's a very complex issue, not a simple issue that can be addressed taking a decision whether to do away with rice or not. Certainly the data which was presented, it shows some roadmap. India was, many states in eastern India, they were deficit in food grain production, particularly Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. They are not having enough food during those green revolution period in 80s and 90s. But now those states have come up, their productivity level has increased. Now they are self-sufficient. So now the question is, the surplus rice which is produced in Punjab, 80% of those are procured through rural distribution system. And rightly pointed out by Raghav that less percentage of rice is procured in those states. So this disbalance has to be addressed. How that has to be addressed, there is really a fine-tuning of the policy at the central government. They are doing how the rice can be diversified to some other crop, but it's not an easier thing. If you are putting pressure on consumers and as well as the producer, so no government will survive. But green credit initiative, some of the finest policy, government of India is forthcoming taking those finest policies. You see, green credit, carbon credit concept was there. Now they have come out with the green credit. Now it is the duty of the scientists like us who come out with all those standards, green standards. How the aggregation will be done at the farmer level. Once you are aggregating, then how you can trade it. So those kind of mechanism, unless that comes from the organization, those who are working on this field, the green credit also will not be successful. So telling that the government is not coming out with a policy, it's not good. But how that policy has to be translated into reality, those kind of suggestions, actionable points has to come from the scientific organization and those who are framing policy and doing groundwork.
So, Dr. Nayak brings up the important point that it's not that the government is not thinking about this. I mean, for the past 40 years, governments have been thinking about what do we do with declining water tables in Punjab, what do we do about soil fertility loss, etc. But we've not been able to get past the political economy constraints, right? So you can say, here is this wonderful policy that will change the way water is consumed in Punjab. But you can't translate that into an implementable policy because obviously the backlash will be strong. So do we have any examples of changes in policies that have taken place that resulted in better cropping practices or better environmental practices, etc.? Are there any lessons we can learn from anything in the last 40 years of history of agricultural policy making? Otherwise, we'll spend the next 40 years still saying, these are the policies that are good, but we can't implement them. So that's a question I think maybe the economists of the panel can think.
I think I can think of an example wherein in Andhra Pradesh there is this zero budget natural farming initiative which is being promoted, and they are doing it at a large scale. It's you are actually including involving all the communities to do this community farming, and so there is a realization that shifting organic can be very helpful, and there are evidences as to that there is reduction in improvement in the soil water quality and fertility, and as well as organic carbon, etc. So as a part of we have done some we have looked at the impact of this Andhra Pradesh zero budget natural farming on economic, environmental and social capital. So we have also published that report, and we did see a lot of positive externalities in that. So we collected the data from the farmers at the ground level and then looked at what behavioral changes. So I think many states have to come forward to actually take this up. And the ZBNF automatically is not a single cropping system, it's a multi-cropping system. So you have to, but then once again it's very labor intensive. But then you can only do it as a part of a community practice.
So I have some reservations around zero budget natural farming. I think that's a whole topic in itself. But that's sort of in addition to the problem. So you're not correcting the problem of the distorted policies. You're saying that these distorted policies are here, but we're going to do something else. But I'm trying to see how do we get the policy distortions corrected, or how do we reformulate agricultural policies in order to address these problems. Let me go to Ravindra.
See, the edifice of agriculture, both in research and in the extension system, is designed for one particular way of doing policies. So, in the same edifice, if you want to change policies and make something happen, it will not happen. So, the entire agriculture extension system is input and material. So, technology is what? Technology is a seed, a machine, or a chemical. Otherwise, there is no technology. There are hardly any agronomy practices promoted largely, by and large, I'm saying. Packaged into inputs and this thing. Into that system, you bring in the knowledge-based system, practice-based systems. It doesn't work. So, is it the policy anomaly that you need to correct? Rest of the system is intact. So, it is antithesis. So, what we need to see is a paradigm shift. So, you are in a logjam of the current way of doing policies, and then the structures you created it, the incentive structures you created it. You cannot clear the logjam by tinkering in any one particular part. You have to deal with the whole. This is one. Second thing, if you want to deal with it, don't see the problem as one. Rice is not a problem as a uniform problem. Rice, export rice is some small percentage of the total. There is so much of rice in the rainfed areas. Uska problem अलग है. इसका problem माने the lowland rice problems अलग है. So there are lots of variation. If you disentangle it, look at the areas, all the dryland areas, tribal areas, all these areas which are 50%. Don't mix the policies there with the rest of the country. So that you are dealing with half of the population. So very rude decentralization of public investments, of architecture of delivering this thing will help. Odisha Millet Mission is a good example. There, by policy, what is incentivized is the practices. None of the inputs are incentivized. It is not input intensive. Practices are incentivized, and then there are extension system, farmer-led extension system, both in Andhra Pradesh community natural farming and here. That's where it's working. They're not depending on the government extension system because that pipeline is input delivery system. That's not an extension system. So if you calculate the work routine of an agriculture officer, 99% of it is input delivery. Now DBT, let's say, it's not extension. Right? So you need to create alternative ways. The examples are emerging in a large scale of how you actually work with knowledgeable farmers, practicing farmers who understood this knowledge, how they transfer this thing, how you do it at scale. That is also experimented. That's also there now. And then how you bring in knowledge into the system, how you spread practices. So an alternative structure of extension is emerging. Only thing is that need to be recognized, the whole thing. So it is not policy alone, but it's an issue of decentralization, it's an issue of knowledge transfer, it's an issue of public structures, incentive systems and all that. You need to create an alternative mechanism. Otherwise, the current way of doing things, there's no point tinkering in any one policy.
Let's go to Kumar. I'm sure he will have to comment.
Three quick comments. One relating to what Dr. Nayak said. You know, a Via Media was suggested for removing the power subsidy in Punjab.
What is it?
A Via Media for removing power subsidy in Punjab, which was an amendment to the Indian Electricity Act, which said that there will be no free power, but governments can reimburse whatever they want as subsidy for power. But that was also not accepted politically. So, you know, that's the best we could come up with. Then the financial limitations of the state government would come in the way and it was clearly stated that it is not to reduce your burden, but it is to reduce the burden on water. So meter it and things like that. One on Araku Valley. I remember in 1992, one of the first major amendments was to the Indian Coffee Act, where pooling was done away with. Without that, this whole experiment would have failed. I mean, that's what an enabling provision should do in terms of, and that was, the Indian Coffee Act is a British act which we inherited. It was quite difficult, but it was done. To Ravindra, I have just a couple of points. Ravindra, it's possible to include millets even within the present framework in your ICDS. This was done in Odisha because that problem came up. The question is that your government has to say, I want that much less rice. That's all that it takes. So basically the food ministry will say, no, you can't have the entire rice and the millets at subsidies. So that creates a budgetary problem. I agree with you that the way to tackle PDS is to move seriously towards decentralized procurement and distribution. Right now the system exists at the state level. I think we have to take it down to the district level. And that is the design element which should not be politically very difficult. Administratively there are some issues, and if we can work around it, even in a few districts, maybe 100 aspirational districts, I think we could look for a solution.
Yeah, I will supplement one thing, that giving an example where the policy is working. Give it a direct benefit transfer. Odisha government, if you say, Odisha, the average fertilizer consumption is around 65 to 70 kg NPK per hectare, whereas in Punjab it is 150 kg. Such is the wide diversity with respect to fertilizer consumption. But even in Odisha also, there are certain pockets the farmers use very huge amount. There are farmers they don't use fertilizer at all. But when the DBT came, the farmers they will have to register themselves. How much area is there? The land record they will have to put on the website site register. Then the benefit will go to them. So this is helping the farmers, those who are using excess fertilizer, by taking the other farmers' name and other things from the retail agency. But now they are unable to take those fertilizer and using excess fertilizer. And the farmers, those who are not using this fertilizer, now they are using this. This is a successful story. So not only for environmental point of view, but from productive point of view and increasing inclusive growth point of view also. The second aspect is the huge database is now available. We need a data policy very soon. If this database, the farmers now they are registering which crop they are taking, how much area they are having, how much credits they have taken from bank, all these informations are lying with government. That those informations has to be made available to the public research institutes and NGOs. And then the targeted benefit can be given in terms of what kind of practices the farmers are they will have to do. Not that in the same village, you do have farmers, they need a different kind of practice. Poor farmers, they need different kind of practice. But targeting is difficult. Once these data are made public, so targeted things can be made possible. So the digitization and the targeted benefit is one of the important positive things that is making change in terms of productive enhancement and addressing the environmental externalities.
I just want to supplement. The other thing I thought about is this neem coated urea that actually helped. Yeah, so that also helped, I think.
Neem and then nano.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But again, the incentive issues, if you have high levels of subsidies for the real urea, then adoption of these is
Yeah, if I could just make a point, this idea of decentralizing in terms of procurement is very important, and a lot of people complain it's too complicated, but when we look at how we've implemented GST, and we've got everything named and numbered. They can even go into your bank account and take interest from whatever deposit you might have there. If we can do that with collection, certainly in terms of procurement, it's not too complicated. I think it's something that when we decentralize it and we break it down from the state level to the district levels and all the way down to the mandal level, I would say, then it's possible to tackle these issues, because there's a lot of different elements to the moving parts in this, and I think it's possible to get that procurement on its way. And right now, the government, for instance, is giving a minimum support price for millets, but the government's not going to be procuring. So it's going to create probably some issues until we get that whole thing settled. So I think a lot of these policy things need to be looked at in terms of their implications, in terms of their announcements, until we're ready to tackle this dealing with large inputs of millets, because we're going to have, just an article alone, more than 10,000 tons of finger millet available to go into the market, which wasn't there before. And if that market's not there, and I would much rather have it go into the Indian food system than have it exported. I mean, on a trip to New Zealand, I was alarmed to see in the health supermarkets in New Zealand, the Indian millets being sold there at to the cost at 10 times the price of what it is here. And all of these, the conscious foods, the Satviks, and all of those guys have been onto that, But what about how do we dovetail it into the Indian system? Because when I see, for instance, export of rice, I don't see the X number of tons of rice being exported, I see X number of tons of water being distributed. And it's that cost, which is another part of the true cost accounting. You know, like I see, if it's 1,000 tons, I see 2,500 tons of water going. And because it's an intangible, we don't even take it into consideration. But it does impact the ecology of the nation. And we need to look at that, you know, in terms of policy decisions. It's very important.
We can get millets in our supermarket in New York also. But, you know, in reality, it's a very small amount compared to the overall production of this country. And it's high-level, high-value entrepreneurs that are doing it. But I see a value in that. I see a value that it creates increased middle class demand for millet consumption, which will then trigger change within the country.
It does. We see that in the coffee. When you get coffee getting recognized, you know, Indian coffee being recognized, suddenly everyone's looking at consuming coffee. And I would be more than happy never to have to export any Indian coffee. It's too precious to export. But per capita consumption is like 50 grams per person per year.
Let's take one last question. Maybe one last question that you can come back. Yes.
My question is with Dr. Nayak. So, although these practices like SRI, or TSR, or AWD, of course, they have multiple benefits and they are they could help in making paddy cultivation more sustainable. But there are studies which report that these practices, while decreasing methane emission, increase nitrous oxide emission, which also has higher GWP. So, what would you say to that?
That's a very specific question.
Yeah, this is a specific question. You see, if you see nitrous oxide emission, if you take the case of Odisha, fertilizer consumption is very minimal. That is about 65 to 70 kg per hectare. So the nitrous oxide emission is directly proportional to the amount of nitrogen fertilizer you are using. And if you see the trade-off, even if alternative bottle drying is emitting certain nitrogen, but the methane which you are reducing, if you finally converting to global warming potential, you are still gaining in terms of GHG reduction in GHG emission. But the area where you do have a higher amount of nitrogen fertilizer use, you need to follow the precision nitrogen management techniques that are available, like leaf color chart using pour R nutrient stewardship techniques. If you are applying, you can reduce your nitrous oxide loss. At the same time, you can reduce methane. Your the final GHG reduction will be there with your alternative water drying system. That we have seen over different states. Some states are having higher reduction GHG, and some are having lower reduction. That is because of due to the trade-off.
And from my understanding, SRI would require not just alternate wet and drying, but also better nitrogen management together. It's not either or.
Exactly.
Right. You had a comment?
No, just on the earlier point, see, we are saying production and procurement and distribution, but I would add processing and storage. Need to be decentralized. So the what we observed in Odisha also. So when we decentralize into a block level, then a lot of processing industries also will come up, because a lot of quantity that is procured and then processed locally and distributed. So you would actually need a lot of investment from the private and then local spread of consumption also increases with the public distribution, not what is distributed, but that will have a ripple effect on that. So there is a cumulative economy that builds up when you actually and then assured price through PDS procurement sets up the economy. The entire millet problem is managing demand and supply. The market is not established, so you need to invest on private sector coming in, establishing something where you need to have a guaranteed price for some time, at least 5 years, 10 years. So guaranteed procurement for some time. So that settles some kind of an economy developing in this.
Yeah, I can see the clock over there, and we're getting to the end of our time. So before I close, let me give the last word to Raghav, because he's been the force behind this. And his presentation is bringing everybody together, and so we'll put him on the spot to give some final remarks.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, joining us for this presentation. Everybody's traveled from outside Delhi. I think it's important to, we've kind of spent the last few months focusing on the quantitative number crunching part of it. We did do some farmer consultations and some field visits. But I think it's important to, I'm a PhD in public administration. I study why programs fail. And my mind always, I'm a pessimist when it comes to discussing government policy. And so my mind always goes to how will we do it, what are the practicalities of it, is the millet available, and I think this discussion has been very helpful in that respect. Just trying to understand how does this play out, like how does it happen? And I think we'll continue these conversations later on. Thank you so much, thank you to the audience, and I think it was a great session.
And those of you who missed the policy briefs, there's still some on the table which summarize the work that's been done on the true cost of the PDS program. And if you want more information, it's also on our website. Thank you all for a great discussion. It's a really exciting vision of the future. It's going to be tough. I hope 40 years from now we're still not asking the same question. 40 years from now, we're saying things have changed and we're moving forward.
I hope 40 years from now we're complaining about millets.
Right, that there's too much millets. With that, thank you all, and thank you.